Hello, everyone. I'm Terry Schultz. I am a journalist who's been in Brussels for 16 years. I cover mostly NATO, but also the EU when it comes to defense and security. And I'm really happy to be here today with my panel. And all of you, it's a packed room. I see how everyone commented on that ahead of me, but that's great when it comes to issues as important as this. So this panel, which defense industrial posture for the West? And that, of No? No, sorry. Okay, sorry. I was gonna just go on anyway. Okay, so now we're going to be discussing the posture of the West between the European Defense Industrial Strategy and the US Defense Industrial Strategy. Will there be complementarity or competition? Trying to drum up some drama here before lunch. With war on Europe's doorstep, both the EU and the US have revamped their plans for their defense technological and industrial bases with more attention not just to expanding production lines, as we've been talking about now primarily in the last 2 years, but also their resilience, as the Finnish former president, is making a priority, and also their resilience. Ideally, these enhancements all mesh together into one Western posture. But do they? Will they? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So I would like to bring in my panel, starting with Timo Pessonen. He is the Director General for the European Commission's Directorate General of Defense Industry and Space, hereafter known as DG DEFIS. Then we have Eric Fanning. In this order, not speaking order, President and CEO of Aerospace Industries Association, AIA, the leading advocacy organization for the aerospace and defense industry, and also a former official in basically every office of the Pentagon. I mean, every sector of the Pentagon. So he has a very wide range of experience. Vice Admiral Javier Romero. He's the defense advisor for the chairman of Navantia, a Spanish state-owned shipbuilding company, which I believe is the 4th largest in the world. And Antoine Bouvier, he's special advisor to the CEO of the European aerospace company Airbus. And now I am going to sit down and we're going to get started. Timo, I am going to start with you. So we'll be hearing more about this, of course, from Ursula von der Leyen and from Thierry Breton. But I wanted to start with you, right there from the heart of DG DEFIS. What do you believe has been the most significant advances that the EU is making now with its new first ever EDIS? And also, I mean, as I was listening this morning, I wanted to just get a sort of gut check reaction when you hear everybody repeat how much of EU defense spending is done outside the EU, this vast majority. How does that make you feel, and how is that going to be addressed in the new defense industrial strategy?
Thank you very much, Terry. I'm happy to be here. I want to thank AST for organizing this magnificent event once again. And I'm really privileged to be here. It's not easy to speak before my boss, Commissioner Breton, and the President, but I try to accommodate myself accordingly. A little bit to accommodate myself accordingly. I think, Terry, that we are here together is already a success. I mean, somebody said that 5 years ago, to have a defense summit, defense industrial summit, people have said it's impossible, nobody's interested. The progress started already before the war, but of course the war has united us more and more. I have said it before and I repeat again. Putin made 3 fatal mistakes. He overestimated the Russian military capacities. He was thinking that he will take over Ukraine in a few weeks. That's why he tried to rush to Kiev to take it over. Secondly, he dramatically underestimated the will of the Ukrainian people and their resistance and the brave of Mr. Zelensky. He did not leave the country. He did not escape. He stayed and he stand and fight with his people. And thirdly, he underestimated the unity of the West. The unity of the European Union, unity of the North Atlantic Alliance, and the unity of the whole the Western world. So I think this is the, let's say, the strategic situation where we are. But of course, he has been learning from his mistake, unfortunately. So that's why the situation on the ground is very fatal still.
Just to point out, Timo, we made those mistakes too.
Yeah.
We also overestimated
Yes.
him and underestimated the
Yep.
Ukrainians.
Yep. I
Right?
was coming to
Okay.
that. I was
Just-
coming
all
to
right.
that.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, but my point is that when you ask that what is the achievements, I think concretely, the fact that we have a defense industrial strategy is a sign of progress on promoting the European defense industrial base and strengthening it. And if you look at the strategy, you see very strong language on our relations with NATO, our relations with our, let's say, key allies. So I think it's really a realistic approach how we need to be complementary and how we should not compete, but to support each other. And the role of industry is the key here. Secondly, what is concrete? What has happened? We have been supporting for the first time, and we are supporting for the first time from EU budget, the research and development projects already for a few years' time, innovation, defense innovation with SMEs being there, but also now supporting the ammunition production. Not the production as a large, but let's say the filling the loopholes in the security of supply chains. So I think that's what we are making, concrete things, very concrete things, and gradually more and more. What comes to the, as you said, we are not investing in European defense industry. I mean, Commission is not telling any member states where you should buy and what you should buy.
Right.
Every individual sovereign member states make its own decisions. What we are trying to do is to create conditions for European industry to buy European and to invest together and to procure together. And this is what we are doing, and that's why our initiatives are aiming to that direction. I quote Secretary Blinken, who said 2 weeks ago, it is in the interest of the United States of America that Europe strengthens its defense industrial base. I'll stop here.
This is true, and I'll ask Eric more about that when it's his turn, but let me go now to Javier Romero. Coming from the maritime sector, which I admit is something I don't know that much about, so I'm very interested in the answer. From your perspective, what do you think should be the priorities of both the US and Europe in trying to make these defense industrial strategies work together, be complementary, and not competitive, when you're talking about countries that largely share the security umbrella of NATO, especially?
So, thank you. First, I'd like to thank also the organizers for giving me and Navantia the opportunity to be here. So, the main target for the EDIS, the European Defence Industrial Strategy, is to make the European Union defence industry to be capable of producing more and faster, and this will require more cooperation and collective action. The strategy proposes target indicators for increasing intra-European Union defence trade and the procure of defence equipment in a collaborative manner. The National Defence Industry Strategy from the US also calls for sustained collaboration and cooperation between government, private industry, allies and partners abroad. But NDIS lays out 4 long-term strategic priorities, such as the supply chains, workforce, readiness, for supporting the development of this modernized defense industrial ecosystem. On the other hand, European industry is a competitive global player, but unlike the US industry, its full potential is affected by years of underinvestment and fragmentation that have increased dependencies on third countries. And here, fragmentation is something that for me should be our priority, first priority, avoid fragmentation. EDIS targets are invest more, better, together, and European. The strategy proposed to get those targets through a series of initiatives, like financial support to industry, financial support to European Union member states cooperation in procurement, establishing dedicated working groups and creating new incentive mechanisms. It is necessary to seek this complementarity of these two strategies, given that at the end of the day, we are allies, and we need to have a strong and resilient defense industry that is capable of responding to any type of conflict sustained over time. A strong US defense industrial base is fundamental for the European Union, and a strong European defense industrial base is also fundamental for the United States.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to pick up on a line you used there to go to Antoine. I imagine Airbus may have a thing or two to say about competition or complementarity with U.S. industry. This line that in EDIS that Europe must spend more, better, and together. As has been mentioned, again, EU countries are spending more on US equipment than on EU, so what can you do?
Okay, so precise questions, and I will illustrate with fighters, military aircraft, where Airbus, we have a plan to rebalance the current situation. I'm sure Saab and Dassault have the same plan to rebalance the current unbalance between US and European procurement in military aircraft. If your question is a precise question, short, medium term, we want to develop Eurofighter, additional contracts in Spain, in Germany, on export. We have a long-term evolution roadmap for the Eurofighter. Medium long term, we have the FCAS, Future Combat Air System, which is not just an aircraft, it's a system. And this system has the ambition to be interoperable with all NATO allies, and also to provide to our European countries strategic autonomy or the operational autonomy. So the response to the first question, what do we do to take this example, is yes, we have a plan, and this plan is short, medium, long term. And this plan is to rebalance long-term what is today, that is what we see as an unbalance between EU and non-EU procurement. Then the second question is whether EDIS will help. And the answer to the second question is also yes. EDIS will help a lot. First, EDIS is delivering a vision of a rebalancing, but not just a vision, a quantified vision, a quantified objective to grow from 30% today, more or less, to 50% by 2030. What are the EU share of EU defense procurement? So this objective of 50% is quite interesting, because there is a huge challenge to grow from 30 to 50, but to be just at 50 is, to a certain extent, a very modest objective.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to keep in mind that this is both a challenging and modest objective, which is a good illustration of where we are coming from, a good illustration also of where we want to go to, and the importance of this EDIS program. So we have a vision. And this vision is not at all what some were used to call a fortress Europe. In fact, when we look at this 30%, Europe, when it comes to defense procurement, is much more an open field than a fortress. And then what we have to do, to reuse a term that you have used, Mr. Chairman Johansson, is to build up a level playing field. And if I dare to take a parallel to other domains of human activities, I would say this is something which is very close in terms of spirit to an affirmative action, to rebalance and to rebuild the level playing field. And this is where we are. Second contribution from EDIS to this ambition to grow our defense business in Europe and to rebalance is what has been set up, which is this European Industrial Readiness Board, which is, from our perspective, a very important forum where the Commission and the member states will have an organized, articulated, formal, high-level dialogue. Because this is the complexity of Europe. On one side, the member states are procuring, and the EU is supporting. So how can we define the way we are working together? How can we define what are the priorities? How can we identify what are the landmarks programs? And maybe the different programs I have mentioned will be tomorrow landmarks program. So we have now a forum. Third, the joint procurement. Joint procurement is a critical contributor to addressing the question of fragmentation of demand. And joint procurement is not just procurement. When we look at what we have done with the MRTT, joint procurement is opening the door to joint operation, which is exactly what we need for the type of products I've just mentioned. And last but not least, cooperation. Cooperation will be supported, cooperation will be promoted. So this is the four main contributors to this unbalance, and you have taken the example of air warfare, that we see from EDIS, and we have to capitalize on that, a quantified vision, a forum of discussion between the Commission and the Member States, direct procurement, joint procurement, and support of cooperation. If we are able to succeed on these four levers, we'll make it.
I'm going to, with your indulgence, Eric, just ask a quick follow-up, Antoine, just not a very long answer, but it just occurred to me, with so many countries making new purchases of, for example, F-35s, aren't these countries, these EU countries, then locked for generations of aircraft into buying American? I mean, this will lead into Eric's intervention, but once you buy this, you cannot just, it will be a long time before you make another purchase this huge as a government.
It will be a long time, up to the next generation.
Yep.
The FCAS is not a competitor to the F-35. The FCAS is of the next generation and will be designed to be absolutely aligned with what are the specific requirements of our countries. Spain, France, Germany, potentially Belgium will join. And so what we want to work on is an aircraft, a system which is optimized against the requirements which are specific to European countries. And then the question of say strategic autonomy, whatever the term we use, is not just to have jobs, not just to have technology, but to have a program which is developed with an intimate and trusted relationship between the industry and the customers. And this is what we have done with the FCAS on what we call the high-level requirements, which are from Spain, Germany, and France, a convergence of operational capabilities requirements. So this is why we are confident that we are not competing against existing aircraft, but we develop the aircraft that our European countries would need to address their operational specific capabilities.
Okay, thanks for that. And then Eric, coming to you, if Europe is going to spend more, better, and together, that leaves the US out to some extent. I mean, on these purchases, to rebalance the spending, that's necessary, as the Europeans point out. So how does the US feel about this? You, I'm sure, have looked at EDIS and have some views on that.
Sure, I have no problem with the balance as it is now.
Certainly.
To me, though, you can't. There's no arbitrary way to separate the U.S. from Europe or from other allies and partners, nor would we want to do that. We're so integrated right now. I have European subsidiaries on my board's executive committee. All of the companies on my board are building things and purchasing things in Europe. And so I think that's important that we don't lose sight of that. But to me, what's most important right now is capacity. I have spent many years in the Pentagon working on many Pentagon budgets. As many European countries face, you get to the end zone, you have to make a lot of trade-offs you don't like. And what you tend to do is make the trade-offs at the same time. So you're taking layers of risk over years. For us, for example, it was munitions. We saw that. We've seen that in the last 2 years. You can't buy 80% of a ship, but in the end game, you can say, I'm going to take 20% risk on this munitions purchase, and then you do it the next year, and then you do it the following year. And what I think planners and customers, defense departments don't necessarily understand is that industry gets very efficient. It takes that long-term signal, and it gets efficient around what it's being told you're going to buy year after year after year after year. And so considering the types of wars that we've had collectively over the last decades and the postures that we've taken and what we've purchased, everything changed 2 years ago. We realized the mistakes we had and the lack of capacity we needed to fight a long war, but more importantly, to deter it from happening in the first place. And so our national security industrial base strategy, the current one, there have been many over the years, and they're built on national defense strategies and national security strategies, which always call out partnerships and alliances as a competitive advantage we have over our adversaries. And it's so important, I think, to keep that front and center. But this time now, after having seen what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. government has pulled industry into it in a way that it never did before. And by the way, I heard this mentioned a couple of times this morning. This industrial-based strategy also calls out that part of the economy that finances defense companies. Profits are important. They motivate, incentivize people to invest, which gives us the best R&D and the best technology. But we recognize we cannot do this alone. We want more capacity in Europe and with all of our partners and allies because we have limitations. If we wanted to build it all in the United States, we couldn't. We don't have the workforce, which has been mentioned before, to do that. But it's also not a resilient strategy, and it doesn't lead to balanced burden sharing, and it doesn't help us globally. So we're all in favor of everyone, including ourselves, increasing capacity because it's a capability in and of itself, and it's a deterrent.
But Eric, the last time you and I sort of made a joke about it in the back, when PESCO was created on the EU side, and it looked like more defense spending was going to be done in Europe, there were nasty letters coming from Washington, and you might have even been in the Pentagon at that time, I don't know. Saying, well, if that's how you're going to behave, then we're going to readjust our strategy. You remember this, Timo? Maybe. I mean, you guys want the Europeans to spend more as long as it's on your stuff.
I was in the Pentagon in the administration before the previous administration. Everyone can do the math there.
Very specific point.
But I do remember those letters. But part of the issue for the United States at the time was the 2%, which is now 2% floor. It has to be both in our mind, which is a conversation we're talking about. And that's the trade-off. This capacity, and I wish the Assistant Secretary of the Defense, who was in charge of this strategy, were here, because I've seen it. These investments don't compete well in the end game. This idea of notional investments for capacity that you might need at some point versus something you can actually put out on an air base or at a pier, which is one of the reasons we find ourselves where we are. It is hard to find the money to invest in that capacity, which is why we need to think about it collectively. I think the objection of the previous administration under PESCO was it was at the expense of actual capability at the time, and we needed to have investments in both.
Okay.
And we have, another barrier for us, as for everybody else. I mean, our budget, our defense budget, is approaching $1 trillion at a time when finally this year the payment on our debt has exceeded national security expenses. And I haven't heard the word inflation this morning. And so this is about growing the pie, not the share of the pie. That's a separate and important conversation, I know, but growing that pie, particularly at a time when purchasing power is under pressure.
That's a nice way to put it. Timo, when you're looking at the European defense strategy, do you sort of take into account that there may be some increased friction with the United States as a result, as things get sort of worked out and implemented?
Well, I don't think this is a problem for United States that we take more responsibilities. I think this has been the goal.
When you say it like that, no.
I think the U.S. If you look what the U.S. presidents have been saying since the First World War, is to take care of your own business in Europe. This has been the story. Nevertheless, you have always been here with us when you have been needed. Be it in the 1917, be it in the 1944, be it during the Cold War. But of course, all the time, the US line has been very clear. Europe needs to take bigger share of the burden. You need to invest more on your defense, and you have to grow up. And that's what we are doing. That's what we are doing now. Seriously learning from the tragic war in Ukraine. It takes time, but I want to underline that, as Antoine said, we have this future big flagship project, FCAS. We have the battle corvette, which of course Vice Admiral knows very well. We have the armored vehicles. We have the cyber shield and so forth. Of course, it takes some time, the hypersonic missiles, to build them and to have them operational. But we have to have the mid to long-term perspective, while at the same time quickly provide more to support Ukraine and to fill our own stocks. So there is a dual track. Doing two things at the same time is difficult for men normally, but I think once we have a very gender-balanced teams, we can do it.
Good. We're going to take questions from the audience as well. I'm going to give my panelists a chance to come back on their colleagues' intervention. Javier, would you like to respond to any of your counterparts here? What you've heard here? Antoine as well?
Well, so perhaps what I wanted to say is that right now, US is very ahead on defense technology. So we, European Union member states, are buying about 63% of our purchases to US companies. And it is because in many cases, we don't have the technology to produce them. It should also be highlighted that we can hardly reduce our current technological gap without investing the same that US on defense research and development. Recognizing that this is difficult to match it because the US are investing more than $100 billion per year. But as the director said, we are investing. We are trying to recover from some years when we almost didn't do it. So I think that right now, European Union with this new strategy is doing a good job. We, the countries, have to, as I said before, try to collaborate, to cooperate, not to avoid fragmentation. And I think that we are in the good path to do that. But of course, if I talk about now about Navantia, we have a long experience and a very good relationship with US defense companies. One of the strategies commonly used to get transfer of technology, perhaps this concept, transfer of technology, is also a concept that we should take in account in Europe, in the European Union, because of this gap of technology, of this technological gap.
Antoine?
May I express a slightly different view?
Please. I love that.
I think in Europe we have the right level of technology, not necessarily everywhere, not necessarily with some requirements which are not within our threat analysis, and certainly the defense strategy of the US has much larger and higher ambitions, also in terms of technology, which are linked to what we see in the US strategic reviews, which is called dominance or superiority. In Europe, we have a different objective, which is strategic autonomy, and strategic autonomy within an alliance with our strong US ally. So the question about level of technology of Europe is not just a question which is without any reference. The right level of technology is consistent with the political ambition, and the political ambition is not dominance. The political ambition is strategic autonomy within an alliance. And I think this is the right way to approach what how we assess the different technology. And I think we are at the right level, not necessarily everywhere. And what we see with EDIS is a strong instrument to go beyond and to further develop the technology that we have developed in Europe. Now, maybe a comment on the US reaction, if I may. I have been through the US National DIS, which is a very well-drafted and interesting document from many perspectives. And what really I have taken away is an objective that this is the interest of the US to have a robust industrial base with its different allies, so including the EU. So I see this objective as a change in paradigm. The question is not just burden sharing 2%, which, by the way, is not just a NATO objective, it's also an EU objective through PESCO. The objective of the US is to build up a strong industrial base with its allies. And strong industrial base, robust is the term which is used in the review, is not just, I would say, licensing production. It's all the capabilities, including design, production, services. And this is where we see, and I think this is the first time we see it in such an explicit way, where we see that the objective of the US and the interest of the US is to build up sovereign, autonomous, robust industrial capabilities with its allies. And the stronger we will be, the stronger the alliance will be, and the stronger our link with the US will be. So there is no contradiction. And the US should be, in my view, if I may, very pleased that in the EU we are developing this initiative to build up a strong, autonomous industrial base, because this will make us a stronger ally.
But Eric, it's easier for the United States if these kind of developments are done under NATO, where everyone's sitting at the same table. And I mean, of course, you can read the Defense Industrial Strategy. I read it. You can see all of those things. But would you rather that more of this was taking place at NATO rather than under EU auspices? And Timo, how do you feel about that? And how much are you coordinating with NATO when it comes to the EDIS?
Well, I do think, I'm not here on behalf of the U.S. government, just to be clear. I am not in the U.S. government right now, that NATO is a very successful construct. And I think NATO being a part of this will help. But whatever construct it is that helps get at the fragmentation that was discussed before, but more importantly, increases collectively our capacity. I mean, our warehouses were not full when Russia invaded Ukraine, and our ability to replenish them is not what it should be. And I know Europe as a whole is going through the same problem, and so collectively, we need to be stronger. And there is no set of partnerships or alliances that is stronger and has been stronger over a longer period of time. But we do think NATO is a good construct to be a part of this, to help at making sure we're focused on interoperability, to help on making sure we get at fragmentation, and that what we do collectively is stronger as a sum of parts.
Okay, well, so, I mean, I wish I had a NATO person here to defend themselves, but they aren't making a lot of progress on fragmentation or standardization, and there doesn't seem to be that much willpower to do that. Camille, am I correct? I learned from the best. No, they really aren't making a lot of progress on this, from what I can tell from the outside, and I'm there quite a lot. And so isn't that disappointing? And in fact, they are concerned about the EU setting standards because they want it done at NATO. And there have even been some sort of sharp, if couched words from NATO headquarters toward the EU when it comes to this exact issue. Am I right or am I right, Timo?
Well, I mean, in our strategy, I mean, we underline very strongly the relationship with NATO. I mean, much strongly than in many other documents lately, coming from the European Union, European Commission, and High Representative. NATO is the foundation for collective defense, common defense for most of our member states, for sure. We are not building anything in parallel. Secondly, we want to increase staff-to-staff structural dialogue. What we are doing, I'm going to NATO this afternoon right after this. So it is an ongoing discussion what we are having. And it's not only a blah, blah, blah. We are seriously exchanging information and to make sure that we are complementing each other, not competing, not duplicating. For example, on defense innovation, Diana, I salute Diana, which is a kind of spin-off of the European Defense Fund. But rightly there, fine. If member states want to do it in the NATO framework, no problem. But at the same time, we do in European Defense Fund a long-term capability capability, capacity building. So I think I really don't see a controversy here at the working level.
But does the EU aim to do more on standardization of weaponry, for example? This is ridiculous, and this has been brought up on other panels, including the one just before us, that you need to be able to interact, that there needs to be more standardized European weapons systems created so that you're not stuck using only national armaments.
Yeah, we say it very clearly in our strategy that the NATO standards, the STANAGs are the other bases. That's what we rely on. So we have not opened the discussion about having a separate track for European standards while we have the alliance in place. We are at war, well, not directly, but Ukraine is at war against Russia. The Middle East is burning. So I think there is more room for a practical, strong cooperation instead of ideological debates.
I'd like to bring in questions from the audience if people have them, otherwise I can go. There's one, two. We have time, we can take them one by one until we get crunched for time. Please tell me who you are, where you're from, and make it short and concise, please.
Of course. Lennart Pattberg from Hague Corporate Affairs. So we were talking a lot about the complementarity between EDIS and the US defense industrial strategy. I'm just wondering, since there seem to be still some question marks for actually realizing the EDIS as a strategy itself, so I would like to just elaborate, for example, especially Mr. Personen, on possible challenges for member states being maybe reluctant to give us some core competencies in defense, and also the question of budget, of course, compared to, let's say, current US spending and the current proposed budget for the EDIS.
So you're asking him if you see those, or you're making
I would like him to elaborate, and the panel, of course, to jump in on possible challenges for both the realization of the EDIS, both with respect to member states' competences and budget, essentially.
I think first of all, we are not proposing any change on the competencies in the European Union. The Commission is not proposing increasing its power in any way in the strategy. We are proposing very concrete things together with the High Representative, and in EDA, Andre Denk is here witnessing, for concrete things what we can do together. Aggregating the demand, how can the supply meet with the demand? Should we have a catalog? We think yes, where we could see what do we have in Europe, what we don't have in Europe, and how we could then boost those productions in Europe, or then member states can go outside
But you
Europe.
know that. I mean,
Well,
Thierry Breton went, he says to
Yeah.
every single weapons manufacturing facility in Europe.
On ammunition, yes.
Oh, yes?
On ammunition,
And
yes. But
NATO knows everything you've got.
Well, I hope so. So, no, but my point is maybe on the financing side. Of course, I mean, our budgetary resources are very limited at the moment, so we came up with 1.5 billion for 2 years for 30 fund projects in several member states from east to west to change the policy, the lending mandate. We want to use that's the task we have from the European Council, and my people are working on it.
We'll come back to the EIB question. I'll take one more from the audience, but this is something I'm also prepared for. Yes, the lady back there.
Hi, Sylvia Pfeiffer from the Financial Times. I just had a question to the Director General. I just wondered, in terms of your defence industrial strategy, how do you view British defence companies? Are they considered as part of the European club still post-Brexit? And if not, how can you ensure that they will be part of that and not excluded? Thank you.
Well, UK is treated similarly as other, to say, the third countries like US. European Defence Fund is not closed, it is not protectionist, it is open for non-European companies who operate on European soil and which meet certain security guarantees given by the member states where they operate. For example, a US company in Belgium, which has been given security guarantees by the Belgian government, can apply European Defence Fund. And the same applies to the other financing instruments, what we have been proposing. What comes to UK, I mean, they themselves, when the Brexit negotiations, they wanted to exclude defence and space, which are in my remit, defence industry and space, from the Brexit deal, and that's why it is up to UK to define their interest and then to approach the European Union.
Sure. Can we have a microphone here for Mr. Johnson? So there's a front row privilege here.
So I'm Michael Johansson, CEO of Saab. I want to ask Eric something. And the basic question is really, do you really believe there's a level playing field today between US industrial competitiveness and the European side? Thinking about how protective US is in terms of making American. If you go to the US, you have to be very local under a proxy or a special security arrangement. You have a full State Department support when you want to sell your products and systems abroad. I think money talks more than looking at the bigger picture going forward in terms of how good it would be for the world if we had a more of a level playing field and European industry took a much bigger portion of this larger pie that we need going forward. So actually the basic question is, do you really believe we have a level playing field today?
Well, I don't think you have a list of things that no one's fighting harder against than American industry in some ways, because one of my bigger companies says buying American makes it hard to sell American. Those things that frustrate your ability to sell in the United States frustrate American companies as well in many ways. And so from your perspective, it's competition. From our perspective, it's agility, I don't know, pick another word. I think there are all sorts of things on both sides of this relationship that hinder it being as strong as it could and allowing resource to flow to innovation as efficiently as we might like it. So yes, there are a number of things in the US system that drive us crazy now that I'm on the industry side, that drove me crazy when I was inside of government. A lot of the FMS issues were just completely nonsensical to me, and the National Security Industrial Base strategy recognizes that and recognizes we have to fix some of those things. And you know, changing anything around technology transfer, foreign military sales, pick the regime, is difficult, but I'm hopeful we're at a generational moment in the United States to change some of these things and to do it broadly. So my main thing on all of our strategies here is, we need everybody's capacities and capabilities to increase. We benefit the more resource that's going into R&D and into production. We benefit by taking advantage of all the really smart countries that are part of our alliances and partnerships. And we've got to figure out some of these controls we have all the way around, because on the end, the more competitive it is amongst all of us, the better.
Antoine, perhaps few companies are as well acquainted with this dispute, this difference of opinion, than Airbus. I mean, do you think things have gotten better, for example, over the years that your company fought with the US aircraft company? Are things better than 20 years ago? I mean, have understandings been reached, et cetera? I don't know how else to say it in passive sentences.
I told you I will deliver a very precise response to your first question. Then I would say not sure. Not sure it is going in the right direction, especially in the current period where there is competition in terms of priority, access to respective industrial base, and a strong push, which is absolutely justified considering the context, to get to non-EU suppliers to support Ukraine. And I think what is important is that what we see today is not a precedent for what will be articulated within the EDIS. And we need for the moment to go to a surge, and the surge, every contributor is welcome, but this should not be a precedent. And so I appreciate your response. It's not an easy question, it's not an easy response. I think the US taxpayer is also providing more to defense in the US in terms of percentage than the EU taxpayer. And to a certain extent, if I try to put myself in US shoes, this is also justification to have all the capabilities in the US, all the technologies in the US, once again with a different positioning, which is superiority dominance and not just strategic autonomy, which to a certain extent could justify the unbalanced situation we see. So the response to your question could well be no, it's not a level playing field by far, but there are some reasons why it is not a level playing field. So let's try to improve. let's not try to change everything because there are just key reasons very deep for this field not to be a level playing field, but also the US to recognize that the EU has a legitimate ambition. And this legitimate ambition is not in contradiction with the US interest. This would be my response.
Do you want to say anything? No?
I would just be repeating myself.
I'm
it's
just
in
here's
our
myself.
interest, yeah.
Can I just
I'm happy
be me?
to keep repeating myself.
I know.
The National Security Industrial Base Strategy is
Yeah.
pretty clear that we need everybody to increase their capacity.
I can take one more question. We have about 5 minutes left. There was another hand back there. Yes. Yes, please. Way in the back. And then I'll give each of my panelists one final question. What is the number one priority? You can think about it while we take this next question. What is the number one priority to make sure that this relationship is complementary and not competitive going forward? So I will ask you that at the end. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Gunnar Schiefelbeiner. I'm representing a German company, Deal Group, and I'm interested in your view on the International Traffic Arms Regulation, the ITAR. My view on this is, I'm not sure if it still fits in the challenges that we have on a global scale. So what is your view on ITAR? And to have a second thought on it, maybe ITAR is, the question is it separating EU and US? I'm not sure. Thank you.
Okay, I can't help on this. I'm not familiar with.
I'll start. I think almost everybody's frustrated with ITAR. Certainly in the United States industry is. As I said at the start, we are a globally integrated industry, and there's lots of reasons for that. Almost all of them are really good and really beneficial to us. And ITAR is an outdated construct. Everybody in the US government knows it. It's very complex. It's a tool that's used by people who don't want maybe to do anything, but there's a lot of focus on changing it. I was saying earlier, the ITAR, FMS, technology transfer, all these things, there is a bipartisan, and there aren't a whole lot of things like that in the United States right now, focus on updating it. And there are different efforts to do that, and we need to show success in certain places and then expand it. So I think ITAR is an inhibiting thing to get at what we're talking about here collectively as it exists now, but a lot of effort focused on trying to modernize it and streamline it. Someone said earlier, it's counterintuitive in a way that we say we need consistent demand signals in industry for industry to build around that workforce, capital expenditures, aligning up supply chains, but things change so quickly, technology iterates so quickly now that we also need to be flexible and agile, and ITAR doesn't accommodate that in the modern era.
Anyone else on that?
So I think from what I hear from our US colleagues, that ITAR is equally an issue for the US industry. And there are a lot of complaints from the US industry towards the DoD on ITAR. ITAR is certainly a restriction to any cooperation, any joint program, any transfer of technology. Whether it is justified from protection of the vital interests of the US, certainly it is, but we have to recognize that there is consequences. There are consequences on the way we can cooperate with US, and we can also procure US equipment. Because when we procure US equipment, there are some significant limitations in our own European understanding or non-US understanding of what are the basics, performance, the source code, the design authority, what are the core of the performance of the system. And there are some restrictions to access. And this is something which, not for us industry, but for the European armed forces, is certainly an important restriction to address.
Okay, thank you. Now we have about 30 seconds left for each speaker. And as I said, please tell me what you believe the number one most near-term priority should be to ensure that the implementation of the defense industrial strategies in both the US and the EU work together, make everyone stronger, and don't create friction. I'll start with you, Antoine, in the end.
I think I have tried to explain that I see no contradiction. So my answer to your question would be that we need to have a successful USDIS and a successful European DIS. And we need to attack the challenges which are very common to all of us in terms of volume, in terms of agility, in terms of ramp up, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of addressing what are the operational requirements. And the question is not how to reduce the contradiction, the question is how to ensure that on both sides of the Atlantic we go as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Thank you. Javier?
Yeah, in my opinion, both documents, both strategies are good for each part. I think that we should give some time to both to start carrying out. And I would say that with collaboration and cooperation, I think that we will be complementary.
Eric?
I don't, competition is good. So I think complementary or competitively, in some ways, both. I think the point is that we do this together, because again, it's taking advantage of something that the big adversaries we focus on don't have, and that's these partnerships and alliances. And together, because ultimately what we're trying to do is deter. Defense budgets may be expensive. They're set up for peace economy, sustained resilient economy, whatever the different words were that came up. That's a lot less expensive than fighting a war, which is a lot less expensive than fighting and losing a war. And we have something together that the Russians and the Chinese don't have, and they're watching. They're seeing, do we stick together, which you brought up, but they're also seeing if we can withstand time. They have different timetables in their mind, and so they need to see a number of ways, not just public support, but from an industrial capacity that we can withstand a conflict if we're not able to deter it. So my biggest, most important thing is that we continue to do this collectively and collaboratively, but allow for competition.
Timo, I mean, as a Finn, these messages are also quite personal to you.
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, I mean, we have the skills in Europe, we have the capacities, we have the industrial capacity. There is nothing hindering us from being, let's say, number one or close to the number one in the defense technology in the future. What we need to do is to get our act together, to get the member states working together with the industry and between themselves. And here I think if you say one thing what we need to make the European defense industry strategy a success is to release more funding for defense industry. And there's another panel for that, and there's no time for that discussion, but seriously, I think we need to be able to mobilize more funding from the private sources, from the banks, from the public lending institutions, in order, and from the EU budget in a way or another, to be able to meet the challenges of today and of the future.
I promise to ask about EIB funding in my later panel if no one does it in between, and probably even so. This is an important question. So, I mean, these are things that both sides, if we're talking about sides, the EU and the US have always known they needed to do, but perhaps never more obvious than with the war in Ukraine, which endangers everyone here. So thank you very much to my panelists for being so engaging. Thank you to our audience. Now I have some very specific instructions. You need to take everything with you out of this room for lunch because they're going to do a security sweep before President von der Leyen comes. So do not leave your stuff here, or it may be, taken away somewhere. And please come back into the room 15 minutes. I know it's useless to say this. Please come back 15 minutes before the next panel starts and take your seats. Thank you.